you would have waited one more day, it would have suffocated you and you would have died. I got fired, which is a story for another time. I thought it was a sore throat. I just thought, you know what? Do what you always did. You're going to get what you always got. It cost $3,000. He would wait until there was a freak blizzard and then just die. It didn't quite turn out to be what it was purported to be. I saw a video recently, a short form video that said that April 25th of this year would be the end of the hardest 7 years of your life. And it listed several astrological signs, one of which being my own, the Aquarius. I've never put too much stock into astrological predictions or things like that, but I looked back on the last 7 years of my life and I realized that I'm just starting to turn a corner. And it is exactly 7 years since, for lack of a better term, the poop hit the fan. I went through a lot of trials and tribulations, and I would like to share that timeline with you from 2019 to present day. And my hope is that you can take something from this video and understand that no matter how long it is or how long it seems or how desperate it might look at certain times, there's a way out. And it takes a little bit of luck and it takes a lot of gumption and a lot of work, but you can get there. So in 2019, I was just returning from Thailand. I am a teacher, as you might have guessed from the theme of this channel. I am a teacher, and I was teaching abroad for 2 years in Thailand, and it was some of the best times of my life, even though I was an emotional wreck at the time for whatever reason. But I had an amazing experience in those 2 years in Thailand, teaching at an American school in Bangkok. I got fired, which is a story for another time, but nonetheless, it was a transformative experience and it changed the way I look at the world. So I'm coming back from Thailand, don't have a job. And so I was doing fine in Asia with that job, but it did, the $1,000 a month didn't exactly transfer over to the United States. So I was in a bit of financial trouble, but I knew at the time I didn't want to get back into teaching quite yet. So my options were open. And I was actually considering, you know what, maybe I should just go back to Thailand because I had such a great time there. And then that was December of 2019. And I don't have to remind you all what happened in 2020. So 2020 happened to all of us. So I was lucky enough to have access to a small room in the back of a studio that my mother used. And she allowed me to stay in this small room rent free because I barely had any money. And I was 38 at the time, and 37, 38. And so I didn't have any money. I just gotten back from Thailand, and I'm living in the back of this, in this small room in the back of the studio with no heat, no AC, barely any amenities, didn't even have internet. So I'm trying to formulate a plan. COVID's happening. I'm just kind of hanging out like the rest of us. And I do that for a while. And then in 2021, I got the opportunity to move to Mississippi and live in a house on a lake for free with a friend of mine. So my friend and I, we moved out to this lake. But in that time on the lake, I was able to focus. I had time. I didn't have to worry too much about money. Between us, I was getting some money from the government. I didn't think they'd give it to me, but they did. Very kind. And I was just writing. I just wrote and wrote and wrote. And I ended up writing a book, and I ended up writing my own screenplays. And I actually ended up getting represented by a screenplay agent, which I thought that was it. I was now a represented writer. I wanted to be I wanted to be a screenwriter. I wanted to write. I wanted to publish books and screenplays and all these things. I had all these dreams. And after a few months, I don't know if anyone out there has ever been represented from somebody they just cold emailed, but it didn't quite turn out to be what it was purported to be. And I was devastated. It just plunged me deeper and deeper and deeper into the, we're still in COVID and things aren't going my way and I barely have any money. And I tried making t-shirts and I tried doing an Instagram and I tried writing haikus and I just tried all these different things and nothing ever worked out, ever. It never worked out. I used to tell my father, the worst part about my life is that nothing happens. It's not it's not so much that anything bad or good happens, it's just that nothing happens. And I would get so frustrated. And, he would give me the typical dad platitudes like, hey, stick with it. No, you're going to get there. No, you're talented, things like that. I'm very lucky that I had such a supportive father. But those were the things that he would say to me. And they were platitudes, like I said. So at the end of 2021, I had had enough. I was just sick of the entire scene. I was sick of everything. And I packed up my truck and I drove from Mississippi to northern Colorado to a place called Estes Park, where I decided to be a dishwasher at the YMCA in the Estes Park. And I was only there for a couple of weeks, which I got involved with a woman of ill repute who just ruined the entire situation for me. And I had to leave after a couple of weeks. But while I was there, I wasn't drinking. I was really focused. I was hiking a lot. And I found a lot of time to think. So I thought it was overall a net positive experience, even though I had to wash an entire room full of dishes, an entire room. Actually, I didn't have to. I volunteered to do it. The room was complete. I said, this is shoddy. This is ridiculous. I have a lot of restaurant experience. I couldn't believe that they had left this dish room like this. And I said, you know what? I'm going to fix this. So I decided to take some initiative and I knew I couldn't control anything else in my life at the time, but I knew I could clean out that dish room. I knew I could. And so I was in there hours and hours and hours every day scrubbing these pots that had been sitting around for months. It was disgusting. But I did it. I cleaned it out. And God knows what it looks like now. It's probably the same way. But I did it. But after that little incident with the aforementioned woman who worked at the YMCA, I took off. I left. And I drove to Washington, D.C. And I got a couple of freelance writing gigs, one of which was writing for Fodor's travel magazine or travel website, whatever it is. And I wrote a story called Mushrooms with Mom in Thailand about when my mother and my sister came to visit me while I was in Thailand. My sister and I took mushrooms, my mother did not. Chaos ensued, as you can imagine. And it was a very popular article. So I thought that was my new direction. I thought now I was going to be a writer for Fodor's. I was going to be a travel writer. This was going to be great. And again, I got a couple more gigs, a couple of local writing jobs about writing about New Orleans and this and that. I got to interview a pretty famous restaurateur here in New Orleans as well. And then just like that, it was over. It was done. They didn't want anything to do with me. Nothing happened. I got a few Facebook comments. A couple people read what I wrote, but nothing happened. Again, I felt like I was back at square one. So after I got back from DC, I was right back in that small room in the studio. And this was around the beginning of 2023. And for some reason in 2023, the rats started getting very bad in that little room. And they would run through the walls and they would run through the roof and they would run through my room and it was just, I looked around at my living situation and I could not believe that this was where I ended up at almost 40. I couldn't believe it. I was living in a rat infested room with no money, no prospects, no significant other, nothing. And as you can imagine, most people in that situation would turn to drinking, and that's what I did. I drank and I abused other substances and I watched way too much TV, and that was all I did because I thought, what was the point? Nothing ever happens. So why do anything? That's what I thought. That was my mindset for a long time. So towards the summer of 2023, things are not great. They're not looking up by any means. And to cap things off, I end up getting something in my throat called a peritonsillar abscess. I thought it was a sore throat. I thought I was having a strep throat. So I treated it as such. I have a friend who's a doctor. I said, hey, man, what do I do? My friend is very fun. He likes to have a good time. And he said, hey, take some aspirin, drink some beer. You're going to be fine. I said, you got it, doc. And that's what I did. I could barely talk. My voice was starting to go. And at this time, my mother and my sister yelled at me, like very loudly, to go to the doctor, which I was avoiding because I had no health insurance. So what am I going to do? So I said, oh my God, I don't even have money to pay for this. But I went to urgent care. I got to urgent care. They took one look and they said, "Oh my God, you have to go to the hospital right now. This is a peritonsillar abscess. If you would have waited one more day, it would have suffocated you and you would have died. Get to the ER right now." So I drove myself to the ER, and I'm waiting in a bed just calculating how much money this is going to cost me. And I'm in the hospital bed, and they tell me that they have to transfer me over to the other hospital in New Orleans, Ochsner, for emergency surgery on my throat, or I was going to die. So they got me an ambulance. And let me tell you, an ambulance in the United States of America costs $3,000. So they strapped me in the back of an ambulance. I could have driven myself, but they did this to me on purpose. And I drove, and the ambulance drove me to the other hospital, where I waited and I waited. And finally, a very kind young female doctor walked in, and she said, "All right, we got to get this thing out right now." And it was just, I was in the bed, and I was all alone. I was all alone for the entire day. And this was by choice, because I was ashamed. I was just ashamed. I don't know why. I thought this was my fault. I thought I had screwed something up again, and this happened to me, and here I go, screwing things up again. So she ends up opening my mouth and slicing the abscess with a scalpel, and I had to hold my own suction tube. It was medieval, but finally I got it cleared up, and I was out of the hospital. Then the bill came due, and I was on the hook for around 8 grand. And at the time, I didn't have close to that. I had nothing. So this sent me back into another dark spiral. Didn't know how I was going to pay for this. The screenwriting job was barely had any work coming in. I knew I had to do something. And I went back into the classroom in 2023, and it was a tough year. It was not my first year teaching. I would not wish a first year of teaching on anyone. It was not my first year, thank God, but it was tough. I got yelled at by students. I told I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was told I was a terrible teacher. I was a terrible person. I was ugly. I was stupid. I was this. I was that. Constant beratement from these children all year long. And then to cap things off, that summer, and in Louisiana, summer is from May to October. So that summer happened to be, we were under something called a heat dome. And I'd never even heard of this, but it's hot as hell in the summers in Louisiana anyway. But this heat dome, it was like nothing I've ever experienced. It was absurd. It was like 100 degrees, 100% humidity. Awful, awful. God. And I had no AC, or at least no central AC. I ended up being able to buy myself a small little portable AC, but as you can imagine, in a room with very little ventilation and the sun bearing down on a tin roof at 100 degrees and 100% humidity, it was horrible. I used to have to freeze bags of water and put them on my chest just so I could go to sleep. And I'd wake up and puddle of sweat, and then the ice would melt. So 2024 rolls around, and my father is getting progressively sicker, and it's my second year in the classroom. Another hard year, another tough one. Same kind of stuff, same student behaviors. Really, honestly, these years that I've spent in the public school system seem to blend together. They're all just so similar. So at this time, my father kind of sees the writing on the wall, and he takes me aside in the summer of 2024, and he tells me, he says, "Son, I'm going to die very soon." And he lays it out, and he says, "I'm gonna my particular disease, which was MDS, monodysplastic syndrome, it spares no one. It spares no one." And I knew he was going to die, but he knew it as well, and he wanted to have this talk to me man to man, and say, "I need you to do this. I need you to do this, and this is how I'm going to die." And he said, "I'm going to get an infection. I'm going to go to the hospital, and I'm going to die. And I don't know when that's going to happen, but it's going to be sooner than later." And he broke it down. So at this time, he started to kind of. My father was not a rich man, I should say. He was a lawyer for the state of Louisiana for many years, and he started giving me and my sister money that he wanted to just get rid of for what he said was tax purposes. So he would just give us little chunks, 5,000 here, 5,000 there, just so he could get offload some of his assets for tax purposes. And I thought about it. I was like, oh man, I got this money now. I could buy a better air conditioner. I could buy this. I could buy that. But I had a flash in my mind that this money is for my future. This money, I need to set this up. So I started investing. And my entire life, I'd always just thought, I'll never be good with money. I'll never be rich. I'll never be this. I'll never be that. But I decided to flip the switch in 2024 and I started reading a lot of literature about money. I read The Psychology of Money. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I read The Algebra of Wealth. I read Think Yourself Rich by Napoleon Hill. That's a good one. Um, and I started manifesting. I started thinking. I tried all these things that I'd never done before because I just thought, you know what? Do what you always did. You're going to get what you always got. And I decided to break out of that and educate myself on financial matters and investing and growing wealth because that's what I wanted and that's what I needed. And I knew I needed to be a steward of my father's money. And I knew that when he died, I'd get more and I couldn't blow it. I could not because I just knew how he would think about that. He'd just be like, nah, well, I was going to give it to you anyway. If that's what you want to do with it, that's what you want to do. I know he'd be indifferent, but he'd be disappointed. So 2025 rolls around. This is still my second year back in the classroom. It's the 24-25 year, eighth grade English. And that January, there in South Louisiana, January 2025, there was a freak blizzard, something that hasn't happened with this amount of snowfall in about 100 years. And that was the day my father died. He died on the day of historic Louisiana snowfall. And I always said that my father was an exceedingly poetic man. I just didn't know that he was that poetic, that he would wait until there's a freak blizzard and then just die. Um, so at the time, obviously, it was devastating. But looking back, it's something that I smile about, knowing that my father was truly who he was, and he, for whatever reason, decided to wait until a historic Louisiana snowstorm to pass away. A strange thing happened after my father died that I wasn't crushed, and I think because I was 43, B, or about to be 43, B, I knew it was coming. It's inevitable with his affliction. And C, I couldn't. I knew that I couldn't. And that was, I felt that I owed it to my father not to fall to pieces because what am I just like, what am I, a cliche? Like, oh, woe was me, my father died. So many horrid things happen all over the world every single day. For me to be fortunate enough to even have a place to stay, first of all, even fortunate enough to share my room with these rats, to even have it, fortunate enough to have this small space heater, fortunate enough to have had a father that loved me and I loved him as much as I did. Falling to pieces would have been the epitome of selfishness, in my opinion. So I didn't. I was devastated and I definitely turned to alcohol for some time after, but it wasn't out of desperation. It was more just a certain numbing of feelings, but a certain amount of celebration, to be honest. But that summer of 2025, I stopped drinking. I was sober for 7 months after that. And I started being very serious about investing. So after my father left me the money, which was roughly $60,000, which to me is a massive amount of money, but in the grand scheme of things in the United States of America, it's not. And like I said, my father's not a rich man, but I did get this lump sum of money, and I decided to get very serious. So I opened up a investment account. The point of it is that I educated myself to the point that I grew the money that my father left me to. I've grown it now to close to $200,000. And then I decided, you know what? I don't want to teach anymore. This is going to be my last year in the classroom. So I knew I had to have some sort of landing pad after I left the classroom if I didn't want to work for anybody else. So I started a business. So looking back on the premonition from that shorts video that this April 25th or 2026 would be the end of the hardest 7 years of your life. And while I don't put a lot of stock in astrology, I believe. I believe it is. I believe it's over. I believe the hardest part of my life, those 7 years, are done. And all this is to say that if you think that you're in a dark and hopeless place, you might be. And it might take 7 years to get out of it or longer. But with belief in yourself and knowing that it will end, like something my dad always used to say to me was, "This too shall pass." I know he didn't coin that phrase, but it was something I always associate with him. This too shall pass. You just got to write it out. And I hope it doesn't take you 7 years. And I hope you don't almost die. And I hope you don't have to live in a room filled with rats. And I hope your father doesn't die. And I hope you don't go dead broke. And I hope you don't have to teach public school. I hope all these things for you. But if you do, trust me, you can come from nothing and end up with something. And you can keep growing it. And that's why I started this channel. I thought you should know that.